So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! It is NFC Championship weekend. The 3-seeded Detroit Lions are set to head over to San Francisco to take on the number 1 seeded San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game. The winner of this game will, of course, go to the Super Bowl and have an opportunity to be crowned world champions of the NFL. And with this being the biggest game of the Detroit Lions season, the toughest game of the Detroit Lions season, we are going to go in depth, taking a look at these matchups, taking a look at where both teams may have a slight advantage, and who in the end will be going to the 2024 Super Bowl in Vegas. So let's start off taking a look at these two teams on a very basic level. For the San Francisco 49ers, they match the Detroit Lions offensively about as well as any other team in the NFL this year. On offense, the 49ers rank as the 3rd best offense in the NFL with the 4th best passing attack, the 3rd best rushing attack, and the 3rd ranked scoring defense. Right alongside them, the Detroit Lions are 5th overall in total offense with the 2nd best passing attack, the 5th best rushing attack, and the 5th best scoring offense. These are two teams that put up a lot of points. These are two teams that work very hard, and they actually have their bread and butter, their identity based off of the run game, and off of that strong run game come a really good game manager quarterback that can put the ball in good situations, put his wide receivers and tight ends in positions to make plays. And honestly, if you take a look at both of these offenses, they function very similarly to how they're structured, to how they're called, to really how they execute plays. And for that reason, they are both top 5 units in just about every single offensive statistic. However, the gap starts to look a little wider when you look at the defensive side of the ball. The San Francisco 49ers are currently ranked as the 3rd best defense in football, where the Detroit Lions rank at 23rd in the NFL. A 20 spot difference in ranking is the difference between the Lions defense and the 49ers defense. Now, passing wise, the San Francisco 49ers are not great. They actually rank as the 14th best passing defense in the NFL, but the Detroit Lions rank as the 27th. As a rushing defense, the San Francisco 49ers are elite as the 3rd best rushing defense in football, but the Detroit Lions actually have them here as they rank as the 2nd best rushing defense in all of football. And then, of course, San Francisco's elite defense leads them to the 3rd best scoring defense in the NFL, while the Detroit Lions are all the way down at the 23rd spot in the NFL. Again, a 20-spot difference between the Niners and the Lions defense, which might lead you to believe that the 49ers are going to run away with this game, right? 2 elite offenses, 1 elite defense, and 1 defense that really hasn't showed up to play in too many games this year. It would lead you to believe on a very basic level that the 49ers are going to run away with this thing. However, I think this game is going to be quite close, as over the last 6 games, the Lions defense, despite ranking 23rd in points allowed on the season, has been quite good. Over their last 6 games, they've given up 17 points, 24 points, 20 points, 20 points, 23, and 23. They give up 17 to Denver after shutting them out in the first half. They gave up 24 to the Minnesota Vikings as they clinched the NFC North Championship. They gave up 20 to the Dallas Cowboys. They gave up 20 to Minnesota the second time around. And then in the playoffs for both matchups versus the Rams and the Buccaneers, they have allowed just 23 points apiece, giving them the opportunity to win the football game. And I think the biggest reason that their defense has been able to keep teams to lower scoring games is the fact that over those last 6 games, the Detroit Lions have allowed just 1 rushing touchdown. That was to Ty Chandler in week 16. That's the only rushing touchdown they've allowed in the last 6 weeks. And in that game, the Detroit Lions held Ty Chandler to 7 carries for 17 17 yards. The Minnesota Vikings as a team rushed for 17 yards on the day, and the Lions rushing defense has been the biggest reason as to why they've been successful in the playoffs, why they were successful down the stretch at the end of the season, and a big reason as to why the Detroit Lions have been able to win these 2 playoff games, clinch the North, and have all of the success that they have found this season. The run defense has been elite, and we've kind of talked about it over the last couple of weeks, right? If you can shut out the rushing attack, if you can keep the running backs out of the end zone and force the opposing quarterback to throw 4 to 5 touchdowns to win the football game, you're probably going to win the football game more times than not, right? If you're making Nick Mullins, if you're making even guys like Baker Mayfield or Matthew Stafford or Dak Prescott or Russell Wilson throw for 4 to 5 touchdowns a game to even be in the contest, you're probably going to win quite a few games. And that's where the Detroit Lions have been, as they're 5-1 in this 6-game stretch. Now, San Francisco, of course, is no slouch either. Over their last 6 games, they have allowed 16 points, 29 points, 33 points, and then right as the playoffs came around, they went 10 points, 21, and 21. Outside of those 2 really outlier games where they allowed 29 to the Arizona Cardinals and 33 points to the Baltimore Ravens, they have been an elite defense for the entirety of the season. And those 2 games probably tanked them from being the number 1 scoring defense in the NFL. They are phenomenal against the run. They are good, not great, but they are good against the pass. They have a really good pass rush. Of course, you have obviously guys like Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, and you have obviously Chase Young there on the defensive line. Like, you have a lot of great players, but I do think the Detroit Lions could potentially be able to match that with their strong offensive line, and I think the pass rush of the Lions could be an issue of its own right. I don't think this is going to be a steamroll of Nick Bosa and Chase Young just going off for 4 or 5 sacks and the Lions can't get anything going. I do think that Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker will be able to match up versus Bosa and Young. And I do think the Lions offense will be able to score some points. It might not be 35, 40 points in a shootout, but I think there's really realistic opportunities for them to put up 25, 28 points on the San Francisco 49ers. And over the last 6 games, that would leave the Detroit Lions winning every single one of their contests. Now, taking a look, I think the biggest factor of this game, I think the biggest thing that's going to determine whether this team wins or loses, whether the Detroit Lions or the San Francisco 49ers go to the Super Bowl, is going to be number 23 on the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey is far and away the best running back in football. He is a versatile passing weapon. He is a versatile rushing weapon. He was a huge reason as to why they were able to beat the Packers last week in the division round, a huge reason as to why they were the number 1 seed in the NFC, and they run through Christian McCaffrey. When Christian McCaffrey has a good day, they look unstoppable. When Christian McCaffrey doesn't have a great day, they look beatable. Not easy beatable, mind you, but they do look beatable. And I think this is going to be the best rushing matchup of potentially this season, as the Detroit Lions in their 19 games at this point, both of the 17 in the regular season and the 2 in the postseason, have allowed just 5 teams to rush for 100+ yards. And as I said earlier, have only allowed 1 rushing touchdown over the last 6 games. Now, that is not a 100-yard rusher. That is not 5 games where a running back, an individual, has rushed for 100 yards. That is as a full team, as a full running back offensive line combination. 5 teams on the season have been able to rush for over 100 yards on the Detroit Lions defense, while Christian McCaffrey has rushed for 100+ yards on 3 of his last 4 games and has 6 touchdowns over that span. He has 6 rushing touchdowns in the last 4 games and 100+ yards in 3 of those 4. So it is kind of the old tale of, the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Is Christian McCaffrey going to go 4 for 5 in 100-yard games and score 1 to 2 touchdowns? Or is the Detroit Lions defense going to go for their 12th game of the season, allowing a full team of rushing attack to go under 100 yards on the year and keep their touchdown-less streak alive for the rushing defense? I think that's going to be the biggest factor of the game. And I think if you can make Brock Purdy throw the football, not that Brock Purdy is a bad quarterback, I think he is one of the elite game managers of the NFL. I think him and Jared Goff are probably the 2 best game managers in the NFL at this point, which is why they're in the NFC Championship game. But I think if you ask Brock Purdy to throw for 4 touchdowns to tie the game or win the football game, you're going to have a good chance to win. Again, not because Brock Purdy's a bad quarterback, but because if you put that on any quarterback's shoulders, a lot of the time they're not going to live up to it. Now, I think as far as the defensive side of the ball goes, I know we've talked a lot about the rushing defense, but obviously San Francisco has quite a few weapons at their disposal. George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey himself is going to be a massive problem. I think that Brock Purdy is quite a good quarterback in the NFL. Trent Williams is going to be a tough guy to get around. Kyle Juszczyk is a guy that the Lions probably have to worry about at the fullback position. Like, San Francisco has the weapons to be successful. And if they shut down the running game, you have three great wide receivers, as George Kittle included, that can put up numbers and put up big plays. I think the best way to go about this, obviously, not necessarily talking about scheme, but as far as matchup wise, I think you should match up Ifeatu Melifonwu on George Kittle. I think you should match up Brian Branch on Brandon Ayuk. And I think CJ Gardner-Johnson should go toe-to-toe with Deebo Samuel. I think those three players maybe don't win their matchups on the day, but I think they'll at least make the matchup as difficult as possible. And obviously CJ Gardner-Johnson and Deebo Samuel have their beef and they have whatever they have going on. I think Brian Branch could match up really well versus Brandon Ayuk. I think they're just both really good young players that are going to go back and forth on the day. And again, George Kittle is almost an impossible matchup. He is big, he is fast, he is strong. So put the Detroit Lions' best athlete from the defensive side of the ball, Ifeatu Melifonwu, a 6'3", super long safety that ran a good 40, a supremely good athlete on George Kittle, probably the best athlete you have in the secondary. Put him on George Kittle, run a 4-safety set with Ifeatu, Branch, CJ Gardner-Johnson, and Kirby Joseph, much like you did last week versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Put your best secondary members on the field and put your best playmakers on the field. Now, will these three be able to shut down the big three of the San Francisco 49ers? A shutdown is pretty much impossible. But if you can limit them, if you can limit just one to having a big day, right? Like we've talked about before. I don't care if Puka Nacua goes for 189 and a touchdown. I don't care if Mike Evans goes for 150 and a touchdown. At the end of the day, that's still just 7 points on the board, and the Detroit Lions can score 7 points on anybody in the NFL. They can make up that difference with any time at any point during the game. So yeah, I don't expect the Detroit Lions to shut down all three of these players. I fully expect either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk or George Kittle to have a 100+ yard receiving day and probably a touchdown on the board. But again, if it's one touchdown, even if it's two touchdowns and 300 yards between the three of them, that's still just 14 points on the board. And if the Lions can contain Christian McCaffrey and even just keep him out of the end zone, they are going to have a good shot of winning this football game. Now, on offense, I think there's a lot of things the Detroit Lions can do. I think the Detroit Lions can hopefully be able to run the ball. Jahmyr Gibbs is a phenomenal running back. I would put him easily in the top 5 running backs in the NFL this season. Sam Laporta is great. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown is great. I think Jameson Williams is an underrated weapon. Josh Reynolds is an underrated weapon. Khalif Raymond could potentially be back for this game. And obviously, the offensive line itself is quite good for the Detroit Lions. I do think they'll be able to put up some points on the San Francisco 49ers. Not a ton. I don't think, like I said, I don't think it's going to be a 31-45 point game. I don't think it's going to be some shootout in San Francisco. But I do think the Detroit Lions will be able to score once a quarter. I think the Detroit Lions will be able to put up 28, 25 on the San Francisco 49ers. And again, that may very well not be enough to win the game. But based on how the defense has played over the last 6 weeks, that actually would be quite sufficient enough to win the football game. So with that being said, I think that in order to go to the Super Bowl, the Lions' path is pretty simple. It's not easy, but I think it's pretty simple. And I'm going to list these things off, and if 49ers fans are watching, they're probably going to laugh and say, yeah, right, good luck. But I think the Lions actually have a pretty good shot at this thing. I think first off and foremost, you have to stop Christian McCaffrey, right? Easier said than done, but you have the best rushing defense in the playoffs. You have the top 2 rushing defenses in all of football, and you've allowed a 100-yard rusher. You've allowed 100 yards as a team rushing at just 5 yards this season, and a 100-yard rusher, that number is even less. Pressure Brock Purdy. Make the football come out quick. Make him uncomfortable in the pocket. And again, you might look at the Detroit Lions defensive line and say, yeah, good luck. You rank 27th in the NFL in sacks, but they rank number 1 in the NFL in pressures as well as number 1 in the league in quarterback hits. They have been able to pressure the quarterback. The problem is they haven't been able to finish plays. So they can pressure Brock Purdy into making a bad throw, making a turnover-worthy play. They have to be able to take advantage of it. And yeah, it might not be a 3 to 4 sack game like it was versus Tampa Bay, but if you blitz well, if you get free shots on the quarterback, you have to be able to take them. And based off of the last 2 to 3 games, the Lions are blitzing really well. I think they will be able, maybe not from their defensive line, but from their secondary, be able to get to the quarterback a couple of times, maybe 2, 3 with the safeties like they did last week. And Aiden Hutchinson, I think, will be a constant threat on the right side of that offensive line. I think you have to play from ahead. Obviously, again, much easier said than done, but I think if Dan Campbell wins the coin toss, he is taking the football just like they have the last 2 times in Detroit. The Lions are a significantly better team when they play ahead. They are, I believe, 8-0 when they score a touchdown first, when they score a touchdown before their opponent. They are 8-0 on the season. They are a significantly better football team playing from ahead than they are from playing from behind. So if they get the football first, it is imperative that they go down the field and at least score a field goal, potentially score a touchdown. And if you go after the first drive, if it's one drive into the football game and the Lions are up 3-0 or even 7-0, that is going to put them in a much better position in the driver's seat than it is if the 49ers go down and they score a touchdown early, putting a lot of pressure on Jared Goff and the passing attack early, not allowing them to really establish the rushing attack in the first quarter. Consistency, I think, is a big thing. The Lions have not been consistent for a majority of the season. They're consistently inconsistent. Some days they look great and they hold the Falcons to 6 points and they hold the Raiders to 6 points and they hold, 2 to 3 teams this year to less than a touchdown score. But then you look at, the Saints game, you look at the Baltimore game, you look at, the Bears game, even the second time around, the Packers game, and they couldn't stop anybody. So I think consistency is going to be a big thing. I don't think we can afford that big first quarter and then a slump in the third or a slump in the second like we had against Tampa Bay. You have to be consistently firing for 4 quarters across the board, and that is much easier said than done, but I do think it is still a possibility. And then I think one-on-one matchup is going to be big. I think that CJ Gardner-Johnson is going to have to step up and take away Brandon Ayuk. I think that Brian Branch is going to have to step up and take away Deebo Samuel or the other way around, whatever it may be, right? The Lions have to win those matchups we talked about earlier on defense. Ifeatu has to be able to force a couple incompletions against George Kittle. He has to be able to maybe not shut down George Kittle, but potentially at least win the matchup a couple times during the game. Brian Branch has to win his matchup. CJ Gardner-Johnson has to win his matchup. Cam Sutton has to win his matchup on the boundary. And again, much easier said than done, but I do think they can do it. So with all of that being said, with all of that being talked about, I think this is matching up. I think this is shaping up to be one of the better NFC Championship games over the last couple of years. I don't think this is going to be some blowout, some steamroll that a lot of people are projecting. I think the Lions are going to give the 49ers a run for their money. By no means do I think that they are going to dominate this game either. I think both teams are going to be pretty battered and pretty bruised by the end of it. And I think the better team will be prepared for a Super Bowl matchup. So with that being said, with all of the suspense out of the way, I think the Lions are going to win this game. I think the Lions are very much like the Cincinnati Bengals of 2020, right? That team of destiny that goes from worst to first, that, is able to kind of squeak by the wild card, squeak by the division, go up against the big, bad, reigning, juggernaut of your conference. For the Cincinnati Bengals a few years ago, it was the Chiefs. They went into Arrowhead and they were able to squeak out a win to go to the Super Bowl. This feels like that Cincinnati team, a team that's been doubted throughout the entirety of the playoffs, a team that continues to win close, and a team that is going to be kind of underrated, not being very projected to win very many times, right, in this conference championship game. Most people pick the 49ers, just like a couple years ago, most people picked the Kansas City Chiefs. To me, this feels like that Cincinnati run. This feels like, maybe Cincinnati isn't the better team. Maybe Cincinnati in 10 games loses to Kansas City 8 times. Maybe in 10 matches, the Detroit Lions lose to San Francisco 8 or 9 times. But on that 10th time, that could be Sunday night. And I think there's an opportunity. I think there's a good chance the Lions could potentially pull that off. So with that being said, I think it's going to be a 28-24 game. I think it's going to come down to the final drive, just like it has the last couple of games. I think the Lions are going to pull it out. I think the Lions have a little bit more recent experience. Obviously, the 49ers are coming off essentially 2 weeks of rest with that Packers game in the middle. They came out a little rusty versus the Packers. I do expect them to be better this time around, but they looked beatable. They've looked beatable over the last couple of weeks, and they're great. They're really good. I'm not going to tell you that this is going to be some guaranteed win for the Lions. Hey, we're going to the Super Bowl. Book your tickets now. But I do think there's a good chance that the Lions can pull this off. I do think there's a good chance the Lions go to the Super Bowl this year, play Kansas City, play Baltimore, and I think the Lions are going to do it. So I have the Lions winning 28-24. Again, not a guarantee. I go back and forth all the time, keep going back and forth and flipping. But for right now, official predictions, potentially a little biased, I fully admit, a 28-24 victory in the NFC Conference Championship game will send the Lions to the Super Bowl. So with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. If you're San Francisco 49ers fans coming over from the live stream we did earlier today, let me know your score predictions, your thoughts down in the comments below. If you're a Lions fan, do the exact same thing. Debate in the comments away. Love to hear what everybody has to say. With all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.